Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are based in. Thank you for taking time to join us in the one of the community event that's happening in alongside with Celo and Huobi, sustainable stablecoin in Web3 and sustainability hackathon as well. In today's session, the title is Mobile First Progressive Web App, and it's really a session where we will cover much more on what progressive web app will be, and really dive in a little bit deeper in terms of providing context of some of the content that will get you going for the hackathon as well. Quick introduction to the speakers and probably a little bit on the hackathon before we'll pass the time to both Brandy and Joe. Both Brandy and Joe are developer relations from Celo Foundations, and they have taken their time to really share with you a little bit about how you can get started and what are some of the documentations that you can refer to when it comes to building for this hackathon as well. So brief introduction for what the hackathon would be. This hackathon essentially focuses about integration of stablecoins with different challenges that are looking to expand its Web3 capabilities and also including sustainability concept into the ideas that all you participants will actually be building for the hackathon. So we do have 3 challenge statements for this hackathon. Number 1 would be the integration of stablecoins with dApp solutions, essentially looking at stablecoin related financial solutions on Celo. It could really be expanding the use of Celo dollar to emerging markets with high rates of inflations, or exploring different payment tools and middleware. The second track, in this case, will be integrating stablecoins with DAOs, and it's ideas they can really look at will be credit-based finance, crowdsourcing platforms, venture DAOs, and even decentralized charity. What we have also listed there are some of the ideas that can really get you going, such as collateral lending for financially undeserved groups, or even democratic funding to meaningful causes such as climate change and education as well. Third challenge statement is the integration of DeFi mobile solutions. It's really about integrating a Web3 component into DeFi. And some of the projects ideas that can get you started would be DeFi plus Earn, mobile DeFi plus SocialFi, or DeFi plus interoperability as well. So this hackathon in itself, we do have a huge pool of prize money up for grabs. In fact, 500,000 CUSD in the prize pool that's up for grabs. And in this 4 weeks of hackathon, we will be awarding 16 different teams at the end of this as well. So for each challenge statement, we will have a challenge winner, which the team will actually be walking away with 50,000 CUSD, Hackathon swag box, and also a listing opportunity on Huobi exchange. Similarly, 3 runner-ups will be selected for each challenge statement, with each of the team walking away with 15,000 CUSD. And last but not least, the most innovative team for each challenge statement will be walking away with 5,000 CUSD. On top of that, what we are trying to do here while this hackathon, it's stablecoin in Web3 and sustainability, the team over here in Celo and Huobi really look forward to how you can integrate a climate change component into your project ideas as well. So introducing the climate change bonus, where there is a pool of 100,000 CUSD up for grabs, where any teams that have an integration of climate change or carbon credit component added to this idea will actually have an additional 5,000 CUSD added on top of any price that is mentioned above as well. So this price pool will be given out till the pool is completely drawn off as well. And most importantly, for this hackathon, we will be awarding a grand prize where the team will be walking away with 100,000 CUSD, hackathon swag box, and also listing opportunities on Huobi exchange. So we do have lined up quite a number of events to really get you going in terms of content, in terms of context, and most importantly, certain perspective to really get you going for this hackathon as well. We do have quite a number of events that have actually gone past earlier on this week. And for this week itself, we do have one more, which is the session they're attending now on mobile first resources. For next week on, we do have a couple more, and we will start on mentor office hours. So do catch on next week's community events to know what are some of the key dates that you should be taking note as well. So big question, how do you actually get started? Very simply, if you have not already done so, you can actually pick up your mobile phone and scan the QR code that you see on the screen right there. This registration to the hackathon would be your entry ticket to everything that's mentioned above, from prizes to resources, to technical help, and also any of the information that you need to know for the hackathon. Once you actually registered, a participant guide will be sent to you via email, of which there will be a comprehensive information about the hackathon, from team formations, who your mentors are, your judging criteria, and submission artifacts that you actually need to be prepared are all stated in there. The next few steps is also important, where firstly, you will have to join the Celo Discord server, which you can find the participant guide as well. This will be the space under the hackathon channel where announcements, technical help, team formations, segments will all be taking place. And we do have a couple more sessions that would be happening at the live stage under the hackathon channel as well. If you don't want to miss out any of the important sessions, any community events that's going to take place next week, or when the mentor office hours are actually happening, do save the hackathon calendar to your own so that you do not miss any of the important session as well. Similarly, this hackathon calendar can be found in the email that you'll receive once you have actually registered for the hackathon. And last but not least, on the participant guide, we have curated a list of resources to get you going as well. So without further ado, let me bring on Brandy and Joe. Both of them are developer relations at Celo Foundation, who will be anchoring the conversation about today's topic, which is mobile first progressive web dApp, part 1. There's going to be a part 2 next week. So Brandy, Joe, the stage is yours.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Justin, for the introduction and also providing the breadth of information in regards to the hackathon. So good to see you. As Justin mentioned, I'm Brandy Camacho with Celo Foundation Developer Relations. I have with me Joe. Joe, you want to go ahead and do a brief intro?
Sure. Nice to see everybody. I'm Joe. I'm on the developer relations team with Brandy. I'm going to be here at first just listening to what Brandy has to present. And then towards the end, just wanted to share some resources and information. And next week, I'll be doing another presentation to go in a little more detail. So nice seeing you, and I'll talk soon.
Excellent, excellent. So one reason why I brought Joe in on this, Joe works with me and makes sure that we elevate the developer experience and we advocate for all the new things that Celo is doing. And one of those things is being mobile first. And so that's exactly the reason why today we're going to provide some tips and tricks on getting started. We broke it out into 2 parts for a reason. The first part is going to be pretty plain and vanilla, right? It's like, first, what is a progressive web app and how do you utilize the technology? So we're going to be addressing that. And as Joe mentioned, after I do a brief demonstration with some slides, we're going to go into an organic conversation. Joe played around with it. He had some questions, and I thought this was a great time to have an organic conversation about that experience. And then that will set the tone for part 2, which will go deeper into tooling and resources to basically reduce the friction for the development cycle for you. All right, so with that said, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, okay? Hold on, it's coming. I promise. Okay, my screen looks like it's shared. I will warn, last time I did a slide deck presentation with Zoom, it was acting a little wonky, so forgive if it does anything goofy. I'll do my best to work with it. So yeah, right away, it's mobile PWA. This is part 1, and PWA stands for Progressive Web App. This is a hackathon, and we're trying to support you folks that are building right in this space, or maybe even if you're a product designer or a product manager, and you're in here on the hackathon helping out the team. Like, this is valuable information too, because it allows you to understand the underpinnings of how these projects work. So right here, I just want to start off with, it's a hackathon. You have a limited amount of time. What you want to do is, throughout the hackathon, you want to craft your narrative for your projects. You want to be able to emphasize the importance of the use case, right? And so it typically starts off with like a prototype, then you move to an MVP, a minimal viable product. This is why I suggest you want to keep things super simple. I call it KISS. I know it's a little funny, a little odd there. I just like to have a little fun. So you want to keep it simple. And what I mean by that, like, the tricks to keep it simple is not to overcomplicate it. You want to focus on plain and vanilla at first, which is why we broke this out in part 1, part 2. Plain and vanilla is really text-based. When you're working with a progressive web app, it's often best to do an inline style. You don't need to complicate your cascade style sheets or however else you want to do it with a dynamic generation of style. Keep it simple. Focus on text. Utilize inline style. Simple user experience that will showcase, right, the functionality of your narrative. And then you iterate on that when you have your functionality in place. So, when you have it as a text and you just, have a button and it does a thing, you're testing what that thing does. You're testing an outcome. You're making sure that it's on point with your project's narrative. And then from there, once you craft all your functions for your MVP, that's where the power of iteration comes in. That's where you get to craft your story and elevate that story with the user experience on the UI side. So my advice, especially right now at the early stage of this hackathon, start off with keep it simple and make sure that you're testing, right? And you're iterating and you're getting feedback. It's super important. All right, I'm going to just jump into it. So like, what is a PWA? It derives from the Web 2, right? Web 2 era. We have Web 1, very static, early stage of the internet. Then Web 2 brought in dynamic elements. It was all about dynamic ability to generate content, to provide streaming services, right? The ability to have real-time data. That was the power of Web 2. And the problem with Web 2 early on was there was low bandwidth in a lot of regions, and this broke the user experience. As mobile phones progress, and they progress with their reach in regards to accessibility, for global accessibility, this fast tracked, right? A lot of communities that didn't have access to broadband before. So that's the power of a mobile phone, is to ramp these communities that otherwise would have lacked access. But even then, when they're on their mobile phone, utilizing these mobile apps, if it's a web app and you have latency issues, you're going to break the user experience, and it's going to be poor for the user, and they're most likely going to shut down the app and forget about it and not use it again because they had a bad experience. And so this is why it's important to talk about these things early on, to talk about what can you do to help protect the user experience. And that's the power of a progressive web app. It allows you to do things like offline caching with a service worker. It's really a lightweight code base. It's not that complex. And I'm going to try to break it down a little bit for you to make it a little bit more consumable if you haven't worked with a PWA before. And ultimately, to get a PWA to work, a progressive web app to work in the browser, it needs to be registered in the browser. And that really depends on that service worker. So let's go into it. Our goal here, right, with the progressive web app, is to utilize a service worker to detect when we're online and when we're offline. In the demonstration, I took some screenshots, and I will provide the repo here in a minute for you. It's really testing out, and here I tested it out. I utilized Chrome. I love the Chrome browser. There's fantastic browsers like Brave, Firefox. They all have developer tooling, which allows you to go into like an inspect mode, where you can go ahead and take advantage of like a mobile first approach. And what I mean by that, on the upper top left of my screenshots here, you notice I was targeting Moto G4. That's an older device. And a little tip, when you're programming for mobile accessibility, you want to target the older generation handsets. You don't want to be targeting the latest and greatest, because when you think about regions that has lacked access before and they're just now onboarding, they're most likely onboarding onto the internet with an older device or a more affordable device that's new. So when you look at testing, you want to test that's going to provide the broadest reach. And so that's one of the advices that I have when you're in here testing within your tools inspector in the browser. And trust me, this is probably the funnest way, at least it's biased, right? Like, we're all very much opinionated. Joe and I talk about this a lot, about what it's like to be an opinionated developer, because we all have our different ways. But the tip for that, to me, that brings a lot of value is to test and check your development efforts utilizing a browser, so you can feel what that experience is like, and make sure that you utilize a mobile view structure. Take advantage of things like bandwidth throttling. So let's dig a little deeper. It's like, how do you test it? Well, one of my favorite tools, and this is Chrome, and there's other abilities to test too in these other and various browsers. They all have great documentation, so you can look it up on the browser of your choice. But for this example, it's Chrome. What you have is you have your tools located on the top right once you go in inspection mode. You can check on elements, you can view the console for log output, which is my favorite part. Like, if I spend the most time when I'm debugging code, it's in the console. But over on the top right, you have Lighthouse, and Lighthouse is super important because it allows you to test your progressive web app to validate that it is indeed being registered in the browser. Test and check. And if you also notice, I on purpose selected the mobile device, and I only wanted to test progressive web app. That's my target. I'm being very specific in my testing, because the other things like performance, best practices, which I love, I'm not saying ignore it. I'm saying postpone it in the early development phase, because you want to develop the functionality of your app. And like SEO, all these other things are fantastic. You definitely should utilize them in your development routine. But I think it's best to do that iterative, right? First, you want to develop as rapid as possible, plain and vanilla, utilize text. This is just suggestions, and then test the core components, and then iterate as you go. When you have the progressive web app working, it's registered, you're confident, that's a good time to start digging into best practices and performance. And then you can look at accessibility. That way you can be super focused on each cycle versus taking it all in and being noisy and then trying to break things down in regards to priority. Sometimes it could be inundating and also become a bottleneck in your development routine. So let's talk about Web3, right? So what we're going to do is we want to take Web2 progressive web app, and we want to migrate that to the Web3 workflow. And all that is really we need to update the service worker to include project dependencies that we depend on with Web3. We want to read and write transaction. That's a big difference from Web 2, right? With Web 3, it's very transactional based. We want to call some contract functions. That too is very unique to the Web 3 space. And then we want to store data in the browser to render offline, which is Web 2. And we're going to utilize that. And the most important part about this for rendering offline is dependency management. This is the power of keeping it simple. It's far easier to take a very lean dependency for your project and convert that into caching on the browser. So that way it's readily available when users goes offline. So let's look at what that looks like. So here's an example of a service worker that I did. Right now we have a cache name. You could call it anything you want. This is a cache name for your development routine. When you're going in and doing debugging, the cache name is super helpful. Then to set up another variable here that instantiates an array of objects. And this is the core part where you tell the browser, these are the components that I want to include within my project. It is a dependency. This is where you put your project dependencies. So that way the browser starts caching to the browser's cache, so it's available when it's offline. if you don't put anything into the cache, even though it might come off as a progressive web app, like it could become validated, right? When you test it out on a progressive web app, when you're using the inspector tools, if you're not caching, but it qualifies and it registers a service worker, the browser is going to say, hey, this qualifies as a progressive web app. And by the way, that also means that it becomes an installable application on the mobile device. So you will have the ability, or the users will have the ability, to download an application-like experience because it's a PWA, a progressive web app. So this is, to me, the most critical advice of utilizing PWA in your project, is to make sure that you take advantage of the service worker. And it's not complicated. Again, I'll give access to the repo here so you can reverse engineer and take advantage of it in your projects. Okay, so reading account data with Ethers.js. Like, I just want to start. I know there's a lot of folks that joined in the hackathon. There are students that probably dug in and really inspired about Web3 and want to contribute, and Web2. So I just want to kind of help you out here. Working in Web3 is actually not that complicated. What's complicated is understanding how you gain access and what toolings to use. And so that's why we do streamcasts like this to help you out. So in this example, I'm utilizing Ethers.js, and Ethers.js is a very popular library that allows access to various toolings and mechanisms to take advantage of the cross-chain world. It's not just specific to Celo. It's what I consider to be general purpose EVM tooling. In a previous session that we did earlier this week, we talked about general purpose EVM tooling, and Ethers.js is one of them. So for like the example with Celo, right here, it's like for Ethers.js, you need to import that library in. And previously, I made sure to include that service worker, and I organized the files into _JS. So that's where I want to put all my files. So I cached Ethers.js. It was a minified version. Now we're importing that into the code, and this is done in JavaScript, by the way. So this is all JavaScript based. I tried keeping it pretty plain and vanilla here. When you import Ethers.js, then you're going to want to go ahead and set up your network, right? And in our docs, we have information about networks. And right here, I'm utilizing what's known as a WebSocket. I did this on purpose because a lot of folks don't know how to use a WebSocket and don't understand that in Web3, we could take advantage of those WebSockets too. Earlier, I shared with you, Web2 brought in the dynamic generation of data in real time for the internet. And this is one of those benefits here. We can use those in Web3 too, especially when you're working with full nodes or even lightweight nodes, right? If they're utilizing, for instance, Geet, which is Go Ethereum, very popular for constructing nodes in blockchain. Oftentimes, they allow you to connect with real-time data using what's known as a web socket. And so here, this also could be HTTP, this could be HTTPS. So it's quite flexible to your needs. The only reason why WebSocket is valuable is because it's real time. It's constantly checking in back and forth, ping pong style in regards to real time data versus when you just do a standard HTTP or HTTPS connection, you got to call a new fetch every time. Okay, so that's really the big difference. So here, this is Alpha Juarez. This is Forno, which is our testnet, and pretty clear in the URL, right? It says testnet.org. If you're wanting to go to mainnet, you would just take away Alpha Juarez and take away testnet. So it'll be forno.celo.org. We have that in documentation, and we can talk a little bit later when we bring Joe back in on this conversation. Next, now that you have your network, now we need to set up your provider. And your provider is how you make the calls to the blockchain. This is how you take advantage of the protocol and the various toolings. Something else worth mentioning, Ethers.js is super cool because it brings in other cool utilities for your project, such as what's known as Web3.js. All the Web3.js utilities are baked right into Ethers.js. So you're allowed to do things like conversion from hexadecimal format to decimal, a lot of quick tooling, like converting gas from WE to ETH. Like There's so much that you can do there. Last thing you want to do is be stuck constructing all these methods from scratch if you have tooling to help speed up your development cycle. And that's one reason why I like Ethers.js, super fast to get started. So this is super critical right here, starting your provider. We're saying we're instantiating. When we say new, that means like we're instantiating a new object, all right? And then because we imported Ethers, we're saying, hey, Ethers, we need a new provider. Here we're utilizing a WebSocket provider, and here's the network, and we're putting that network in. So that's it. Now that we did the provider, we have access to the blockchain, but maybe you don't want to do direct access, right? Maybe you don't want to do a static version of the network. Maybe you want to interact with MetaMask. We all use various wallets and MetaMask. And once when you have a wallet provider in the browser, it's actually pretty universal. And what I mean by that is here, I'm not, oh, sorry, I got click happy. Here in this example at the top, we're importing Ethers.js, but the difference is I'm not calling a network string, right? Here we're setting up a provider, and what we're doing is we're doing a windows.ethereum, and then we're saying any provider that, and you can restrict your providers here. You can say, hey, this is just going to be Celo network. So you still can utilize things like MetaMask, but if the networks get switched, it won't allow access. But by putting any allows folks to utilize your solution, your application user experience, and they can go ahead and switch networks because we are in the cross-chain world. So there's a lot of value to utilizing windows.ethereum. Now, word of caution, a lot of wallets are still adapting to the various fragmentations that go on in mobile. And what I mean by fragmentation is in Android, there's many devices and there's many versions, and that's very fragmented. And, you know, in the developer workflow, when it comes to releases, that sometimes poses problems because as these new versions of operating systems comes out on these mobile devices, could come new and fascinating features, but also come with deprecation. And what I mean by deprecation, that means things are being pulled out. They're no longer valid because they've been replaced with new methods. And so you just want to be mindful of that through your development workflow. Test often. That's why, again, earlier I said test in the Chrome browser or test in your favorite browser of choice, but take advantage of the mobile view and test it out. And then you don't want to ignore the device. Like if you're targeting a device, you want to test it on a device, get tactical, you know, with the way that you're testing. Test and check both on your computer and on the physical device, because oftentimes the browser behaves differently on the desktop, even though you're doing mobile, utilizing mobile tools for debugging. The experience on the mobile device can be vastly different because, again, it's a fragmented market. And it's even the same, you can say the same with Apple as well. Like Apple has a lot of different versions. Each of those versions have different iterative cycles that could have different deprecations in regards to the way that tooling happens as the versions increase. So just sharing that advice. Testing on the desktop first is the easiest, least path of resistance for your project. And then once you get your core functions done, then you go to the mobile device and test it. Okay, enough of that, right? I know I'm getting a little long-winded here. So the importance of going and testing and debugging. Debugging is your powerhouse when it comes down to the iterative process of your development lifecycle for your project. When you test using, just look at like in this example, the Progressive Web Apps online, where we have an account and all we're trying to do is just query the balance, right? We're just trying to get the balance. We want to make sure it's accurate. And in the debugging console right here, I make sure that I put in additional things like what block height was that? This allows me to know what is the latency because I could have a block explorer on another tab and I can go ahead and test the app and I can see, is it updating appropriately? Is there additional latency going on in my application use case? So that's why I utilize things like block height. And I put that in the debug console because to me is, you know, when I'm developing, being a developer on a project like this, I want to make sure that I'm paying attention to latency and I'm understanding what's going on. Because if, for instance, in this example, the block height was 10440777, but if I saw in the block explorer, it was 800, I mean, that's a significant amount of blocks that have been added. And since the average time on Celo is 5 seconds, I mean, that's a significant amount of latency. That's a good time to start thinking about debugging that further, looking to the network connections. And that's where in the network tools, right, you can test your latency. And that's also where you can test and simulate latency environments, like meaning you can add latency on purpose with a network connection to see what the effect is. Very beneficial. And this is why I say keep it simple, is because you get to do these things before your application code base gets too complicated. Because as we know, code compounds, just like knowledge compounds, your code base compounds. The more complex it is, that means the greater complexity you're gonna have during your debugging lifecycle. So take advantage of it. And here you also notice I'm testing multiple accounts. I only have one account on the GUI, but I have 2 account balances being checked. That's the power of log output. So reading transaction data, I want to mention that the tools, right? When I showed earlier that you create a Web3 provider, so first you import your library, in my example with Ethers.js, then you make sure it connects to a network, and then you create your provider, okay, because it's connected. Here I'm utilizing provider to get a transaction, and that's just the transaction string. I just put the transaction string in, and then I say .data because every transaction has some form of data. Typically, this data also, like when you're interacting with smart contracts, your smart contract data can go in here as well. Metadata can go in here. So right here on this specific transaction, I have a hex right there, right? The results 0x48 ending in 21. And you can see that I have that on the GUI with that little arrow. Now, this is default because the blockchain, especially with EVM, loves to utilize hex-based data. If you put in ASCII data, they're going to have some problems. One of it is serialization of the object. What I mean by serialization of the object is the way that you're transmitting data across classes, across chain. When you're utilizing this data, it needs to be serialized. If you have white spaces, you have special formats, that becomes problematic. When it comes to computers rendering that data, they see a string. Some of these strings contain special formats, but will break and cause you to basically break your code base or cause a memory overrun issue. So that's why blockchain needs to be super efficient with the utilization of data, and that's why we have hex data as a pretty much a standard in the space. It reduces white spaces and makes your data serializable right from the start. But how do you use it? That's the bigger question, right? Like, okay, great, Brandy, we got hex data there. Well, it's useful because of metadata, and as things advance, the protocol typically will add new features over time. That's why we have things like fork management. Sometimes we need to add a ton of features to the protocol, which will cause a new fork. But when it comes to your use case and your application development, you typically don't need to worry about that because as forks occur, they're backwards compatible. So you don't have to worry about that. But what you do need to worry about is the way that you're utilizing data for your project. And that's why I want to emphasize on this. When you have a transaction, you can attach data to it. And I want to share this with all you folks developing, because there's some coolness, at least from my point of view, which is obviously very kind of biased. I love the ability to take data and put it into a transaction. I find some usefulness out of that. Like if I'm trying to have compliance, like, I don't know, in the health industry, for instance, you have various compliance methods that you need to do when you're working with data. And this is one area that you would most likely utilize is metadata within a transaction of any data that's happening within a health information system. Same thing in fintech, right? Compliance for different regions, different regulations. Like, how can we be proactive with compliance? Well, that's metadata. So that's why it's important. Now, earlier I shared, when you have a Ethers.js, I got some nice additional dependencies included with that, such as Web3.js. And Web3.js has utilities. And one of those utilities allows you to convert hexadecimal to ASCII. And this is what it looks like. So in that example, with that transaction hash, we have the hexadecimal data. And once when you utilize the tool, and look how easy this is. It's ethers.utils to UTF-8 string. And then you put your data in there, your data object. And that's the hexadecimal data. And then it converts it to ASCII. And here we go. It says, hello, Celo devs. Pretty cool. Now that could be a JSON object, right? So if you wanted to do a nested JSON object, you're trying to add some creativity with the way that you interact with your project account control list. I don't know. Anything is possible when you have metadata. And one of the most useful things with metadata is JSON objects. All right. JavaScript oriented JSON Notion, something like that. Yeah, look, I'm so sorry. Forget. But nonetheless, this is super powerful. So do take advantage of it. All right. So with the progressive web app, I did have a smart contract that I wanted to do. And I want to share this with you. I was trying to think like, what is the simplest way to show the power of Solidity? And since it's programmable money, how do we make sure that we can accept a payment and then give back something in return for that payment autonomously, right? The cool thing that I love about blockchain, I was actually talking about this last night, is that it's programmable and it's a trustless environment. You don't need to trust the smart contract. It's trustless. There's nobody there. I mean, you do trust the smart contract because it's visible and you can go ahead and audit it, but there's no human in the middle that could potentially cause an issue, right? And that's what I mean by trustless. There's no intermediaries. But nonetheless, here, I just created a smart contract. In this example, I'm actually importing the base ERC20 token. And you can do this with Solidity. A lot of early Solidity developers don't really know about how you can take advantage of other contracts. Well, you can just bring them right into your project. You just need to import them. And the reason why it says import contracts / that it says base ERC is because I'm caching that data, that contract. I'm able to cache that. And then when I submit it utilizing a tooling like Remix, and Remix, you have your working directory, you organize your contracts. So there's contracts there, and you put any project dependencies in there. You also can refer to GitHub. So like if you're working with OpenZeppelin, you can still import through GitHub route right in the import statement in your smart contract. I just want to reiterate something here. It's like this focus was on progressive web app. This smart contract is decoupled from a progressive web app. It doesn't care about a progressive web app. I'm just trying to showcase an example for you and allow you the ability to reverse engineer, play, and experiment to help you accelerate your development routine. So in this smart contract, I have a couple functions, right? We're going to receive data. We have a fallback routine. And then we have a sell function, which allows you to swap the token. And the whole point of this is that you give a Celo, and this would be on the test net. You don't want to be doing these things on the main net, not until you test it, obviously. So then what you're going to do is you give a token where right here we have a receive external payable. Payable means that this function is a payable function. If that doesn't have payable there, it's not going to accept any tokens. So you might have receive, but you'll notice it's not working. It's most likely because you didn't mark it as payable. Very important. Solidity requires type safety, right? It's turning complete, and that's regarding type safety. We need to make sure that we address things like payable functions. And then next, have a fallback. And all this, by the way, you could look these up. These are fallback and receive are core components of Solidity language set. And you can go ahead and read the Solidity docs and look these up because there's even additional options with them. And there's such things like you can override these with different features. And then next I have a function for sell. That's really where we're going to be doing the swapping and giving back the funds in the original token. So when it comes to smart contracts, you need to be able to call them. Smart contracts, once they're compiled, they turn into machine code. Machine code is not human readable. And that's why the application binary interface, the ABI, the contract ABI, that's responsible for the mapping. Okay, it's really important that you, when you compile your smart contracts, that you make sure you export your ABI. Truffle frameworks will do that for you. I know in part 2 of the PWA experience that we have coming up with Joe, he can share more about utilizing the ABI. But nonetheless, I just want to call it out here because when you have a smart contract, you want it human readable and you want to be able to call the functions in human readable code. So you do take note of the ABI. Now, how do you take advantage of contract data in a Web3 provider? That's what this example is all about. So again, we're just importing Ethers.js. Then what we're doing is now, because we want to interact with a smart contract, we need the contract address. So earlier I shared with you, here's a smart contract. I compiled it. We got an ABI after it was compiled. We also get in return, typically when you compile with whatever you're using, if you're using Remix in the browser to test your smart contracts and deploy them, or if you're using Truffle, there's always going to be the ability to access the ABI information. So you're going to get in return with whatever you're using for compiling a smart contract, you're going to get the address. And that goes here, right? So we just created a constant variable with the contract address. Then here we put in the ABI. And one thing that's really important to understand is you want to make sure you take out all the white spaces of your ABI. If you just copy and paste this ABI right here, you see we have white space, we have breakpoints. Remember earlier I was talking about serialized objects and how it can break things? Well, this is another example of how having white space and format can actually break things. So in your code, you just want to go ahead and utilize whatever means you want. Like you look online, there's generators that will allow you to copy paste code to condense it, or you can use utilities to handle that, or you can write a function by scratch to handle removing the white spaces. Nonetheless, make sure you remove those white spaces and you have one string with your ABI put into a variable called the ABI. Now, next we call a provider, right? Now we're instantiating. We have that new there, that we're instantiating a new object. We're saying, hey, Ethers, we want a provider. We're utilizing a WebSocket provider. And here we're targeting the browser window.ethereum any. Now we're taking that provider, and again, we're instantiating it. This is a difference from what I was sharing earlier about like querying a transaction on the blockchain. Now we want to work with a smart contract. We need to tell our provider, hey, we want to work with a smart contract. So here we instantiate a new object, again with Ethers, and we're saying Web3 provider window any, and we're calling contract new Ethers contract. And then we're putting a smart contract. This is the main object here. Okay, this is the one where we're taking in the contract address, we're associating the ABI, and we want to use it with our provider. That's really important. All right, next, I just want to show you like what this example ultimately end up looking like. I have two accounts. I have the balance, I'm getting the balance, and I have the address. Then I have a transaction hash. Then we're doing the conversion, which I shared earlier. We have some data, and what we want to do is utilize utilities to capture that data. And then we have our smart contract, and we want to test two debs swap. So we want to swap the debs token, or we want to swap to Celo. This is just testing. This isn't meant for users. This is meant for development testing, right? It's a developer sandbox at this point. So all I want to do is test the swapping functions. And again, you can notice my output in the console log, I'm putting more information in there, the token symbol, token supply, those things I find important as I'm going through testing things out. I store data in various JSON objects that are nested. So that way it's meaningful to me in regards to my development lifecycle. So kind of want to share like what this looks like. I kind of record it. So here, what I did is I refresh the screen. It's pulling in data. I have an array with data, what I shared earlier, nested. Then I'm testing it through Lighthouse, and it's going through. And right here, it's telling me it's installable, right? This web app manifest and service worker meet the installability requirements. That's important because that's going to allow the user to install it like a regular application. Then it goes through and gives you additional information in regards to registering that service worker. If there's any issues, this is where you're going to find out how to take your next debugging efforts. Like it's allowing you insight in regards to what you should be focusing on next. Like if you're not registering a service worker appropriately, it's going to give you information on how you can correct that. That's another powerful thing about Lighthouse is it actually provides resources to documentation to fast track your debugging efforts. Okay, so here it started in the application here. This is where the service worker is registered. And on this screen, you can see we even can play around with the service worker. We can force a sync. We can test it out. There's a lot of cool stuff. And I always advise playing with these things, but ultimately the service worker's here, and you can also unregister. So a lot of times when I'm testing, I want to unregister and update that service worker. I'm going to continue the demonstration here for you. Then IndexDB. This is super important. When we're talking about caching data, you remember earlier on, I showed you the service worker and I said, you want to have their array of objects and you're going to add that in. This is where they go into the index database. That's where we're storing the data natively through a service worker. So here we have some data. I'm just putting in the contract call. I'm putting in the balance, my name and it's nested objects. So that way I can test it out. On the left, I just got done switching the phone version and refreshing to verify that the data is coming across. And it's also, I was targeting an iPhone. I want to see if the iPhone worked. I made sure that I had a balance on my MetaMask for testing. And then here, I'm going to go ahead and do a swap. So I kick off the swap. I need to confirm the transaction. It's going to get confirmed. I utilize the console output to see what's going on. And then you can see the token balance there will change. Now, a lot of times when you're dealing with smart contracts now and interacting, you have to do approvals. So something you're going to find when you're doing your projects is that you need to manage that transaction lifecycle. And a lot of times it requires approving. So here I was able to swap the token, my balance reduced. Now I can swap back to Celo and confirm. So the reason why that's cool is a lot of folks want to be able to create things like a peg, like a one-to-one. And since we are on the, talking about stablecoins, like what's the easiest method? You can do a one-to-one peg as well. And that's what this example is. So yes, feel free, you can download that QR code, gets you to that repository on the bottom right-hand corner here. I have the GitHub URL for you where you can experiment with this. And also the smart contract address that I had on this example is on the block explorer, and I made sure to verify the code for you. So that way you can just play within this in the block explorer. Okay, next up here, I'm almost done. Documentation. I've said it before, documentation is super important. Our docs are now built utilizing Docusaurus. Joe has done extensive work on this. We have tons of updated content. Joe's been adding tutorials, making sure he's providing support for the community. Super good job, Joe. Love all the work you're doing. Tons of useful resources, such as partners, right? Like Figment and Decade. So additional hackathon tips. I just want to share with you, story does matter. All right. When you're thinking about your project and you're building, you're thinking about your users. What's that narrative? Where's the value exchange going? That's the narrative that you're trying to build for your story. Design matters too. So you want to think about the mobile user experience, but you don't want to do this from the start of your project. You want to focus on the lower level components, the functionality, and then you want to iterate and then start bringing in heavier design to your code and iterate. Super important. All right, that's it. I know that was long-winded. Good grief. I'm so sorry it took so long, Joe, but I thought it was important to go over some of those things. Since I do know a lot of folks from various universities are here that might not have dealt with Web3 before.
Sure, so yeah, that was great, Brandy. Thanks so much. Yeah, every time I hear you talk about it, I learn more myself. One thing I know, starting off, the link to the repository was mentioned a couple times. Some of it can be, and sometimes overwhelming, even for me, with how deep you get into it. It's like challenging for me to learn more and do all that. But I would say to everyone, check out the repo, run the codes that Brandy was showing, see it for yourself, play with it, and then it all clicks together. And then when it does, it's definitely for the better. You learn a lot more that way. And that would be my first recommendation coming in, other than thanks for sharing all that. I'll be rewatching the video myself probably.
You're so funny. But I do remember when you were playing with it, you ran into an error with certificates. And I don't believe that that's fully addressed on there, because you can't, in GitHub, I had a problem with uploading empty directory. And so with my example, it depends on setting up a certificate for your test sandbox. You want to share a little bit about that?
I honestly don't. Well, the solution was, I thought we just had to remake the certificates directory, and then the command from the terminal created the certificate, and then it worked. But it was just a silly mistake on my end, thinking that it was all completely set up. Just a little additional work that you would talk me through.
Yes, I just want to share. So I'm on the repository now, and I want to call out a couple things that Joe gave me for feedback. One, it's a little confusing. What's all these part 0, part 1 through 6? So I did update a few months ago. You see, 2 months ago here. Been busy. I would update more, everybody, but we're a very nimble team, so we work on as much as possible. But I try to answer that. So Joe did ask me. I'm like, there's multiple directories, because what I'm trying to do is show the iteration process, right? P0 is like, that's my initial work. I'm just testing things out. P1, I'm iterating on it. I did some cool functionality. It's been acknowledged through my testing and debugging. And now I'm adding complexity. Then I iterate again, more complexity. And so I was trying to showcase that complexity. And like in P2, here, when you go to the source code, one thing that you'll notice is I have a Web3.js example in here where it's just one file that sets up a provider, gets the block height, and I'm just utilizing console log. This is just one area where I was testing it out, just making sure things work, making sure it caches well. That's not on P2. And this is the power of the iterative process. And if you went on P6, where the project stands right now, when I go in there, you'll notice, I'm not depending on that anymore, right? That's because I decoupled a lot of functions and centralized it. So here now I have the get balance in its own class, and I set these various import statements because I decoupled my code. I decoupled how I gain chain access, how I interface with the database, tagging, because I'm generating HTML on the fly. Those were added through the iterative processes. So that's why I broke it out. I thought it would be valuable for you folks going in, so you can see how we sometimes iterate through a project when we're experimenting. And this is just an example of that. P6 obviously is the latest version. But one thing to note is during the project setup, Joe, I believe the issue is we had a problem because right here we needed to create a self-signed certificate. And in the instruction here, it says navigate terminal session to search directory. And one thing that we noticed is because we have GitHub and we're utilizing, like for me, I was utilizing Atom, it did not publish the empty directory there. So one thing that we have to do here is when you're following the instructions, you need to create that empty directory on your end after you clone the repository. So that's a tip. I just want to share it. And let's talk about what users can do. Like, let's say we should update this, right? I think it's a good idea, Joe. We should update this, right? Like, let's update it. How we would do that is we would post a new issue. And the power of issue is that you as a community, us as a community, we can go ahead and share, hey, love working with this. You can go ahead and type all that, but I think more meaningful thing is missing _search directory. So just be mindful with the way that you're utilizing issues, but do post an issue. I don't have an issue, so it's not captivating my attention yet. Not important. If other people are having issues, I'm busy. If you take the time to post an issue, then I'm going to take the time to review and address the issue. And that's true with all these other projects. So super important to interact here. And Joe, you can relate, right, with our docs. Do you want to share a little bit about the best way developers can go in and use our docs and how they too can utilize issues to help mature our docs?
Sure. Yeah, I can go ahead and share my screen. I know we're running a little short on time now. I'll definitely add this to the list of things to do in the talk next week. I didn't have the docs open right now, but basically, I guess since I'm here, I've made this thing I can share with you. So I call it the Celo Developer Guide. And in there, the reason for it is that there's a lot of information. Where to even get started? Where are the links to everything? So this doesn't explain much, but what it is in each of these sections are links to certain things. Like this Launchpad, I call it everything. Once you're a developer, all the stuff that you'll need, say a link to the docs and the test faucet and our explorers and the forum. From there, you can keep going, but it'll start off in like the basics of Celo, the links you need, some popular blogs that you might want to read, dApp examples of things that have been built on Celo. And it goes on. Just to give some example of what it is, it's that introduction section, how to build on Celo, set up your environment, create a dApp, some popular tutorials and demos and repos. For example, in the demos is this one, the PWA experiments, which is everything Brandy had just gone through. That's that here. And there's some other ones. To get to the point of the docs that's one place that all of the descriptions for everything you might need to know to get started with Celo is in there. And that'll link you to get to the GitHub. And again, I guess it didn't take us straight to the docs repo, but you can go ahead and find it. And if you did come up and you had an issue with something you're not finding, you'll see we have some here already. And in the same way, you can go ahead and submit your own issue. Let us know what you want to see fixed, and then I can go ahead and update it. To get to all that, just to show you, I'm at Nyzio on Twitter. And the reason I showed you that is I have it pinned to the top of my Twitter is how to get back to this developer guide, where again, you can go ahead and find everything. One thing just to show you kind of how this works is I like to do sort of like top down, like how do I just launch a dApp as quick as possible? And from there, I can see what's going on, get a better understanding of what Brandy was just mentioning. And in that case, a tool like Remix will get you there. It's an online coding tool. You can start coding online. And just to give you some example of the type of stuff we'll be talking about in the next tutorial is they have this interface where you have a contract, you've got your smart contract there. You can go ahead and save it, deploy it, compile it. And when you're done, I didn't really show you exactly what was going on, but the idea is that you've already got a smart contract launched that in the browser you can go ahead and mess with. One reason that is helpful is that you can make new smart contracts here, bring them into the PWA experiments, extend what Brandy's done already. You can also just look at them in the first place and see, okay, there's these smart contracts and I want to start working with them. Take the different contracts, check them out. If you do want to paste them back into Remix, extend them in any way you want to explore and experiment, you can go ahead and do that. So that's we got 1 minute left, shared a little bit about what's going on, but I'll definitely go more into this next week for you. But that's all I got for now, Brandy.
Thank you so much. Yes, looking forward to your discussion and presentation with part 2. So part 2 is all about elevating this, right? We talked about some core foundational components here in regards to a progressive web app. I always love understanding those underpinnings. So yes, that is it for this. We did those underpinnings. This session is concluded. Definitely keep note of our upcoming part 2 because Joe's going to take this a step further. I look forward to it. And super good job again, Joe. I really love all the work you're doing supporting the community, trying to make it as easy as possible to get that information. Thank you. All right, Justin, that's it for us. And thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you.
Yep. Thank you, Brandy and Joe, for really the in-depth information to really know where the developers at the hackathon could actually access the information for. Similarly, we have actually put out some of the links that was actually shared in some of the parts that Brandy and Joe have actually mentioned. So please click on the links, be it the GitHub docs.celo.org, or even follow Joe, where you can actually go to the Notion page of the developer guide that he have actually quickly ran through earlier on as well. Just a quick reminder for those who are there, the QR code is actually up on screen. You've yet registered for the hackathon, please do so. And other than that, really happy hacking, everyone. And thank you all for joining the session today. Goodbye.